Okay, in this video, we're going to take a look at vocabulary smart sheets and how they can be used for teaching science. And before we get into those, there are just a few really big ideas about learning vocabulary that might be important to review. So first of all, one thing we know for sure is that having students simply copy a definition results in very little or no memory of the term, almost always. And that is because, and I'm sure you've seen students do this, very often they'll copy the definition and never really think about what it means. They're just trying to get the words right, and then later on they try to memorize that definition. Now typically those definitions are in adult language or technical language, and they're not in kid-friendly language. And so what happens is when they're trying to rote memorize definitions that they really don't understand, obviously that's temporary memory at best, and they'll soon forget the term. Now the dilemma with science is that there's so much technical knowledge that you accumulate that new knowledge is based on. So very often you'll have definitions that contain a lot of other terms that are fairly technical, and if you don't know the definitions of the terms in the definition, it's really hard to understand the definition itself of a new term. So the dilemma about definitions is, first of all, it's really important to ensure that the definition addresses the distinctive features of the vocabulary term. Now, definitions often come in components, like there'll be two or more parts of the definition, and sometimes it's a good idea to help students recognize what those specific different components of the definition is by underlining the different components. Likewise, definitions, the best definitions are always going to be in student-friendly language. And basically that means you need to avoid defining new terms that use old terms that also require defining. In other words, if you're defining new terms using other vocabulary terms that students don't know what the meaning of, they're not going to really understand the definition. And that's a real dilemma when it comes to science, because I was saying earlier, so much of new science knowledge is based on knowledge of previous science definitions of terms. And so sometimes it's really difficult to do things like define concepts like mitochondria or photosynthesis without using a lot of technical terms. So something to just kind of be aware of. The other thing about learning new terms, there's some really critical things that students must do if they're going to remember those terms. And the most important ones is that they have to elaborate the terms to remember them. Now, for an example, they need to have multiple experiences or uses of the term, and where they're using the word in their own words in applied context. In other words, they're not just memorizing definitions, they're actually using the term as part of conversation when discussing the science that you're teaching. And that has to be used multiple times, sometimes as many as 15 or 20 different times for the term to really stick and be retained over a long period of time. Likewise, students have to understand the new terms within the context of real experiences. And science teachers tend to be the best at this in terms of creating various experiences, experiments, things to observe, etc., and then linking the new definitions or the new terms to those experiences. So keep that good work up, because that's really critical if students are going to remember the terms. Likewise, anytime you can have students elaborate the new terms, not only by using their own words when they're talking about it, but also doing things like visualizing or drawing or illustrating what the term looks like, or illustrating the critical features and that sort of thing, that's really going to help them remember the new terms. Finally, it's really important that students make personal knowledge connections. In other words, they think in terms of the terms, in terms of what this reminds them of or what it connects to and things of that nature. So the vocabulary tools that we're going to be looking at from the Make Sense strategies are really designed to target and facilitate various things that you can do that encourage student elaboration. And so what you won't see is a lot of copy the definition and memorize it sort of thing, but rather smart visuals or smart sheets specifically designed to promote this form of student elaboration. So when you're looking at the home page of the software, this is the section that we're going to be focusing on. And what I'm going to do is go through and just highlight a few of these tools to kind of give you a sense of what's here, and what they're designed to do and what the prompts do. But keep in mind that there are a whole lot more of these here than we'll have an opportunity to share with you on this video. So you might want to just spend some time exploring them. First thing we're going to look at is something called word castles. And when you click on that, this page will open up. And so to begin with, I'm going to show you just a very simple one to illustrate some of the basic stuff that I've been talking about. And so this particular one, you have the term, what's the definition, draw a picture of what it looks like, and what's a knowledge connection. So there's just some simple basic prompts there. Remember that the definition needs to be in kid-friendly language to the extent that you can make that happen. What we don't want students to do is simply copying definitions, that they need to use their own words as much as possible. So for an example of what that looks like, let's say the word is composition, decomposition, endothermic process, and exothermic process. For word castles is another one. With this one, what you have is the new term, what's its definition, draw a picture that illustrates it, what's a knowledge connection, what's it make you think of, what would be a synonym for the term, what's something else that means essentially the same, what would be the opposite or an antonym, and if there is one, what might be a homonym, and then finally write a sentence using the term. Now, a lot of teachers have students do things like look up the definition, write it, and compose a sentence. And usually that's just not enough. And so what we're doing is having students respond or think about the new term in different ways and on different levels. And so here's an example of one that sort of illustrates that. And so the term is a biotic factor, and the definition is all living things in the environment. Now notice that's in kid-friendly language. Knowledge connection, animals, plants, germs, bacteria, etc. A synonym basically means alive. The antonym would be never, dead or never was alive. A homonym, like the bionic woman. In a sentence, my pesky little sister is a biotic factor. It's kind of cute there. But you get a sense, and of course this is drawing a picture of a living thing, so that kind of illustrates that. Students actually really like doing this kind of stuff. And because it's kind of it gets them thinking about it in different ways. It's addressing higher order thinking in some ways and so forth. So another example, if you click on semantic tables, this page will open up. And obviously there are going to be some really designed for much younger kids, but there are also some that are more appropriate for high school. And so what we'll do is let's just take a look at this thing called a semantic table 1. And so the way you have this set up is you'll have the term, and this term is always going to be either a type or a part of something or a member of a larger group. And so these are places where you're noting the distinctive features of the term, key things to remember about it. It's important because, and then draw a picture of the topic. Now students can also import pictures that illustrate that topic. Personally, I prefer that they actually hand draw these things, because when they're drawing and they have to think more about what the term means and how that can be illustrated, and that involves a lot of elaboration. So while importing the pictures can be really cool and very precise and so forth, and we will do that, I really prefer that students draw the picture themselves. Now they're quite welcome to copy a picture, but you probably get a sense of where I'm going with that. And finally, the last prompt here is like a simile or metaphor. This term is like. Now here's an example of photosynthesis. And so it's ways living things get and process food. Actually, that should be plants. So it's a type or part of, well, I guess that does fit. Photosynthesis is a type or part of ways living things get and process food. That works, okay. Key things to remember about photosynthesis, and those are the distinctive features. It's important because, and in this case, the student imported pictures, and then is like making a cupcake, because basically you get the mix from the store, stir in water, add heat energy, bake in the stove, and then you add icing, and what you get is really sugary human food. And of course photosynthesis in many ways is similar. Obviously we're not using heat energy there, but rather solar. Okay, here's a slightly different one. This is the same setup here in features. This is different in that here the students identify what would be an example of this term, and then a non-example or something you don't want to confuse it with. is like in terms of simile and metaphor, what would be a knowledge connection, and draw a picture. And so here's one that illustrates that. Again, I'm going to kind of go through these fairly quickly, so if you want to pause the video so that you can study what was actually noted on these, feel free. They're also in your handout, and all of these are also on the software. This one is comparing two terms, and so the setup is essentially the same. It's a type or part of or a member of this larger group, features, example, non-example, and is like. Here's an illustration of that. Okay, another one are sort of simple word comparisons. And so if you click on that, it will take you to this page. And so there's some simple VINs. There's the VIN plus connections, words linked in context, and so forth. So let me just share with you an example of one of those. This is your simple, it's just 3 VINs on a page. And so what we might be doing is comparing induction with conduction, radiation with convection, fission with fusion, etc. This is called a word synectics, and the way this is set up is you have this word is like this word in these ways, or because they both involve. This word is not like it because this one involves this, whereas this one involves something different. Now here's an illustration of that. Chlorophyll versus chloroplast. And so here's how the things that they both involve, but here's how they're both different. Here's an example. If you click on word connections, it will open this page. And again, some of these are really little kids oriented things. Just to illustrate one of the ones is personal connections. And so I'm going to click on that. And so the way this is set up is all of these terms are related to this topic. What would be the new words? What would be the definition of those terms, again in kid-friendly language or in their own words? And then what would be a personal connection? What's this word make you think of? And so here's an example of how that might be applied. Your basic web or semantic web. Now notice how this one, parts of the cell, and the way this one was actually used is they used various terms that are associated with parts of the term and then define those. Now let's just look at these definitions of these terms. Chromosomes inside the nucleus contains information about the cell. So that's a pretty good definition. The only thing that students might not know is the word nucleus. And so that's an example of maybe you have to watch out for that and make sure students understand that word. Let's look at this one. Cell membrane holds a cell together and separates it from its surroundings. Now that's a really good definition because it's in kid-friendly language and it doesn't use technical language, but it does capture the essence of what a cell membrane is. Vacuole stores food, water, and waste, again in kid-friendly language. So you kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. It's very difficult sometimes not to use the technical language that also needs defining, but I realize sometimes you have to. So this is just an example of just a few of the vocabulary smart visuals that are on the Make Sense Strategies. What I would encourage you to do is just take some time, click through these with the software and get a sense of what's on there. And good luck with it.